The morning started like any other at the Galactic Defense Academy on Station Meridian 7. Danny Price sat in the third row of the advanced xenobiology classroom, his notebook open and his pencil ready. The human cadet had always been a careful student, someone who listened more than he spoke and observed more than he reacted. Around him sat cadets from 15 different species, each one representing the best their worlds had to offer to the Galactic Defense Initiative. Professor Krell stood at the front of the classroom, his forearms gesturing at the holographic display that showed various predatory species from across the known galaxy. The Vathian instructor took great pride in his knowledge, and today's lesson focused on apex predators from Death Worlds. Today we examine the Shraxi, Professor Krell announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had studied dangerous creatures for 3 decades. The hologram shifted to show a massive creature that made several cadets lean back in their seats. The Shraxi stood 3 meters tall on powerful hind legs, its body covered in armored plates that overlapped like natural battle armor. 6 eyes arranged around its skull gave it nearly complete vision in all directions. Razor-sharp claws extended from both its primary and secondary limbs, each one capable of slicing through standard military hull plating. The Shraxi evolved on Shrax Prime, a world that makes most Death Worlds look tame by comparison. Krell continued, zooming in on various anatomical features. Gravity 3 times galactic standard, atmospheric pressure that would crush most species, and a predator-to-prey ratio that defies standard ecological models. Danny studied the image carefully, noting every detail that Krell highlighted. The professor pointed to a small gap at the base of the creature's skull where the armored plates didn't quite meet. This represents their only biological vulnerability, Krell explained. A narrow opening approximately 2 centimeters wide that provides access to their primary sensory organ cluster. However, this knowledge remains purely academic. No soldier has ever successfully exploited this weakness in combat. The Shraxi moved too quickly and unpredictably for any conventional weapon to target such a precise point. A cadet from the Zephron species raised one of her tentacles in question. "Professor, what about humans?" she asked. "Their home world Earth is classified as a death world. Do they have apex predators comparable to the Shraxi?" Krell's expression shifted to something that looked like amusement. "Earth is barely qualified as a death world," he responded with a dismissive gesture. "While it has some challenging aspects, it lacks the true apex predators found on worlds like Shrax Prime or Vathian Major. Humans evolved in an environment with no significant natural threats. They succeeded through numbers and basic tool use, not through any particular prowess as predators or warriors." Danny didn't react to the comment, though Lisa Grant, another human cadet sitting 2 seats away, frowned slightly. The lecture continued for another 20 minutes, with Krell detailing the hunting patterns of various apex predators and their impact on galactic military doctrine. Then the alarms began. The emergency klaxons cut through Krell's lecture with urgent, mechanical screaming that sent every cadet to their feet. Red warning lights flooded the classroom as the holographic display automatically switched to show security camera feeds. What they saw made even the most experienced cadets freeze in shock. 3 Shraxi moved through the corridor. Outside the xenobiology research wing, full-grown adults, each one matching the specifications that Krell had just been teaching. The creatures moved with terrifying grace despite their size, their claws leaving deep gouges in the metal flooring with each step. "That's impossible," Krell whispered, his forearms trembling slightly. The research specimens were juveniles, barely half-grown. "These are adult hunters." The security feed showed Station Commander Helen Barnes coordinating the emergency response from the Central Command Center. A voice came through the intercom system. Calm but urgent. All personnel, this is Commander Barnes. We have a code black situation in Sector 7. 3 hostile xenomorphs have breached containment. All cadets and civilian staff are to proceed immediately to designated safe rooms. Security teams, arm yourselves with heavy plasma rifles and coordinate through Tactical Channel 9 on the screen. They watched as a security team of 6 trained soldiers took defensive positions at a corridor intersection. The Shraxi appeared around the corner. And what happened next lasted less than 10 seconds. The soldiers opened fire with their plasma rifles. The weapons designed to stop armored targets. The energy bolts struck the Shraxi's natural armor and dispersed harmlessly. The creature's hide absorbing impacts that should have killed them. The lead Shraxi covered the distance to the security team in 3 massive bounds. Its claws moved in precise, economical strikes that a lifetime of evolution had perfected. The soldiers didn't have time to retreat or adjust their tactics. The security feed cut to another camera as the system automatically censored the graphic. Violence. Danny watched the remaining feeds, his mind processing patterns and behaviors with the same attention he gave to everything. The Shraxi weren't just attacking randomly. They moved with pack intelligence, communicating through body language and coordinated movements. One creature would draw fire while the others flanked. When faced with sealed blast doors, they analyzed the structure for weak points before applying their strength efficiently. They're hunting, Danny said quietly, though his voice carried in the shocked silence of the classroom. Not rampaging, hunting. Professor Krell turned to look at him, confusion evident on his alien features. What difference does that make, Cadet? Hunters have patterns, Danny replied, his eyes never leaving the screens. They have preferences and tactics. Random violence is chaos, but hunting is behavior. And behavior can be predicted on the screens. Commander Barnes was redirecting security teams, but the Shraxi were moving faster than the defenders could. Coordinate. The creatures had killed 18 personnel in less than 6 minutes and were now heading toward the station's civilian wing, the section where families of Academy staff lived, where children played in supervised recreation areas. Lisa. Grant's hand gripped her desk hard enough that her knuckles turned white. There. Heading for the kids, she whispered. Professor Krell moved to the classroom door and activated the emergency barrier system. Heavy composite panels began sliding down over the doorway and windows, designed to seal the room completely in case of hull breach or hostile boarding. We'll be safe here, Krell announced. Though his voice lacked conviction, these barriers can withstand plasma fire and explosive decompression. We simply wait for security to handle the situation. Danny looked at the barriers, then at the security feeds showing the Shraxi tearing through similar barriers in other sections of the station. The creatures' claws found weak points in the composite material, exploiting manufacturing seams and stress points with unsettling precision. Professor, Danny said carefully, those barriers failed in Sector 9 after 4 minutes. We're in Sector 8. The Shraxi will reach us in approximately 7 minutes at their current pace. Krell checked his tactical display, and his expression confirmed Danny's calculation around the classroom. Cadets began to pack. Vex, a Karathi cadet with crystalline skin, moved toward the reinforced storage room at the back of the classroom. Thyra, a Venix student whose species prided themselves on tactical thinking, was already accessing the emergency supply lockers, looking for anything that might serve as a weapon. Danny remained at his desk. He picked up his pencil and held it up to the light, examining it with the same careful attention he gave to everything. It was a simple wooden pencil, the kind humans had used for centuries, graphite core surrounded by cedar wood, painted yellow with a small eraser on one end. Nothing special or advanced, just a basic tool for writing. Lisa watched him from across the classroom, and something in her expression shifted from fear to curiosity. She knew Danny well enough to recognize when he was thinking through a problem on the security feeds. The Shraxi reached Sector 8. The emergency barriers began to descend across the academy. Commander Bonds gave orders that had the weight of desperation behind them, and Danny Price sat quietly, holding a pencil, watching 3 apex predators approach through the corridors. The first barrier outside their classroom shuddered as claws began tearing through composite material that was supposed to be impenetrable. Professor Krell backed away from the door, his forearms spread in a defensive posture that his species had evolved over millions of years. The other cadets huddled together, some whispering prayers in languages Danny didn't understand. Lisa moved to sit next to Danny, not speaking, simply trusting. The scratching on the barrier grew louder, more insistent. The composite material began to crack, and Danny Price, human cadet from a world that barely qualified as dangerous by galactic standards, tightened his grip on a simple pencil and prepared to teach the galaxy what it meant to be an apex predator from Earth. The first barrier collapsed inward with a screech of tearing metal that made every cadet in the classroom flinch. Composite fragments scattered across the floor like deadly confetti as the Shraxi's claws finished their work. Through the gap, Danny could see the corridor beyond and the massive shapes moving with predatory purpose. Second barrier won't hold much longer, he said quietly, still examining his pencil with that same careful attention Professor Krell had backed against the far wall, his Vathian physiology making him tall but not built for combat, despite coming from a death world himself. We should hide in the storage room, Vex insisted, the Karathi cadet's crystalline skin reflecting the red emergency lights in fractured patterns. Seal ourselves in and wait for rescue. Danny shook his head slowly. They'll smell us or hear us, he replied. Shraxi sensory organs can detect heartbeats through standard walls, according to your lecture. Professor, they'll know we're in there, and they'll either wait us out or call the rest of their pack. Krell's 4 eyes focused on Danny with something between confusion and desperate hope. You have an alternative plan, Cadet Price? Because I'm open to suggestions that don't involve us dying in the next 5 minutes. Danny stood up and began moving desks, creating specific pathways through the classroom. Lisa immediately understood and started helping without asking questions together. They arranged the furniture in a pattern that looked random but had clear purpose to anyone who understood hunting tactics. Professor, you said the Shraxi have one vulnerability, Danny said as he positioned another desk. The gap at the base of their skull where the sensory organ cluster sits, 2 centimeters wide, protected by overlapping plates. Krell nodded, still not understanding where this was going. Yes, but as I explained, that knowledge is purely academic. No weapon can target such a precise point on a moving target that massive and fast. Military AI systems have tried and failed. Cybernetic targeting implants don't help. The Shraxi move too unpredictably. Danny held up his pencil again. What if the weapon isn't trying to hit a moving target? He asked. What if the target moves into the weapon? The professor's expression showed he thought the human had lost his mind from stress thyra. The Venix cadet, whose species valued tactical analysis, stepped closer. Explain, she demanded. You're talking about predicting their movement pattern, precisely enough to place a strike weapon in the exact position where that 2-centimeter gap will be at a specific moment that requires understanding their behavior at a level that humans evolved to have. Lisa finished, understanding dawning in her eyes. We're persistence hunters. We didn't evolve to be stronger or faster than our prey. We evolved to track them, to understand them, to predict where they'd be and when. Danny nodded and continued. Arranging the classroom, he created a path that would funnel the Shraxi through specific choke points. using the desks to guide their movement while giving them the illusion of control. On Earth, humans hunted animals 5 times our size with nothing but sharpened sticks. Danny explained as he worked. We didn't need to be apex predators ourselves. We needed to understand apex predators well enough to kill them with tools that shouldn't have worked. The second barrier began to buckle. The sound of claws on composite material had become rhythmic now. Methodical, the Shraxi weren't just tearing through obstacles anymore. They were demonstrating their dominance, making sure their prey knew death was coming. Even if you're right about their movement patterns, Krell argued, a pencil isn't a spear. It's wood and graphite. Their hide deflects plasma fire. Danny finished positioning the last desk and took his position. Behind a specific workstation, plasma disperses across the surface. He said calmly, but a pointed object driven with sufficient force into a precise location doesn't need to penetrate armor. It needs to find the gap in the armor. The 2-centimeter opening you mentioned. And Professor, you said they're sensory. Organ cluster sits right behind that gap. If something penetrates that opening, their entire nervous system would short out. Krell finished, understanding finally replacing confusion. But the precision required, the timing, the force, is what humans do. Lisa said firmly she had moved to position herself at another key location in the room, ready to support whatever plan Danny had formed. Thyra and Vex looked at each other, their alien features showing doubt, but also the recognition that no one else had any plan at all. The second barrier failed metal, shrieked and tore, and then fell away completely. The doorway stood open for 3 seconds. Nothing moved. Then the first Shraxi entered the classroom up close. It was even more terrifying than the holographic displays had suggested. 3 meters of evolved killing power, muscles rippling under natural armor that had turned away military-grade weapons. Its 6 eyes scanned the room with cold intelligence. That recognized prey and began calculating the most efficient way to end them all behind it. 2 more of its packmates waited in the corridor, ready to assist or capitalize on whatever their leader started. The lead Shraxi's gaze fixed on Professor Krell first, the largest, the oldest, presumably the most dangerous according to Predator logic. Danny watched the creature's head turn, tracking that movement with eyes that his ancestors had used to follow wounded prey across endless grasslands. He could see the gap at the base of its skull, now not just as an academic detail in a lecture, but as a real, physical vulnerability too. Centimeters wide opening and closing slightly as the creature breathed, protected by overlapping plates that shifted with each movement. It should have been impossible to target, but Danny had spent his entire life on Earth learning to read movement, to understand body language, to predict behavior. Every martial arts class, every hunting trip with his father, every track and field competition had trained his brain to process motion and timing at an instinctive level. The Shraxi took a step toward Professor Crow. The classroom floor vibrated with the weight of it. Vex made a small sound of terror that drew the creature's attention for just a moment. The predator's head swiveled to assess this new stimulus, its sensory organs analyzing threat levels and categorizing prey. In that instant, Danny saw the pattern, the way the Shraxi moved its head when switching between targets, the arc of motion that brought the vulnerable gap into a predictable position. For exactly 1.3 seconds before the protective plates shifted again. It wasn't random, it was behavior, and behavior could be exploited. The Shraxi dismissed Vex as a minor threat and began to turn back toward Krell. Danny remained perfectly still, controlling his breathing like he'd learned in meditation classes that were supposed to help with stress, but it turned out to teach him something far more valuable. The ability to wait, to be patient, to strike at exactly the right moment and not. 1 instant before, Lisa watched him from across the room and recognized the expression on his facade. Seen it before during training exercises when Danny would hang back, observe, and then execute a solution that no one else had considered. Tira was calculating odds, her tactical mind trying to find any scenario where they survived the next 60 seconds. Professor Krell had stopped backing away and stood frozen, perhaps finally understanding that movement would trigger the predator's hunting instincts. Second, Traxi entered the classroom, moving to flank its leader's position-pack tactics. Just like the security footage had shown, one draws attention, while others position for the killing strike. Vex whimpered again, and the second. Traxi's head turned toward that sound. Danny saw it happen in slow motion through his heightened awareness. The creature's assessment protocol engaging head turning in. That same predictable arc, the gap at the base of its skull rotating through vulnerable positions as it moved. The moment approaching when behavior became pattern, pattern became prediction, and prediction became opportunity. His fingers tightened on the pencil, simple wood and graphite, a tool that humans had used for centuries to record knowledge, to share information, to build civilizations. Now it would serve a more ancient purpose. The same purpose that sharpened sticks had served on African plains when early humans faced predators that should have eaten them, not as a weapon of strength, but as a weapon of timing and precision, and the absolute refusal to be helpless. The Shraxi completed its threat assessment of Vex and determined the Karathi Cadet was not in immediate danger. It began to turn back toward the larger group. Its head moved through the arc that Danny had been waiting for. Gap exposed, the timing perfect, and Danny Price moved. What happened next would be analyzed by military tacticians for years afterwards, studied in academy courses as an example of something that shouldn't have been possible, but in that moment, it was simply a human doing what humans had always done, using knowledge and timing and tools to survive against impossible odds. The pencil left Danny's hand with the full force of his forward momentum behind it, not thrown, but driven his entire body. Weight channeled through his arm, through his hand, through the wooden shaft, aimed not at where the creature was, but where it would be in the fraction of a second it took for the strike to land. The graphite tip found the 2-centimeter gap with precision. That made Professor Krell's earlier dismissal of human capabilities seem laughable in retrospect. It penetrated deep. Driven by momentum and perfect placement, the Shraxi's nervous system shut down instantly. 3 meters of apex predator collapsed to the classroom floor with a crash that shook desks and made the remaining. The silence in the classroom lasted exactly 4 seconds. 4 seconds where the 2 remaining Shraxi processed what they had just witnessed. 4 seconds where their pack hierarchy and threat assessment protocols underwent complete reorganization. 4 seconds where Danny Price grabbed another pencil from Lisa Grant's desk and positioned himself for whatever came next. Then the smaller of the 2 Shraxi screamed. The sound came from somewhere deep in its chest, a mixture of rage and something that might have been recognition. This wasn't the calculated hunting cry they used to coordinate attacks. This was pure emotional response. One of their pack had fallen to a creature that shouldn't have posed any threat at all. Professor Krell had backed himself into the corner of the classroom, his forearms raised in an instinctive defensive posture that millions of years of Vathine evolution had programmed into his species. Dyra had gone completely still, her tactical training telling her that movement would draw attention. Vex had actually stopped whimpering. Shock overriding fear, Lisa stood ready near the window barriers, watching Danny with absolute trust. The smaller Shraxi charged, not with the calculated precision of a pack hunter, but with the raw fury of a creature that had just watched its stronger companion die. It abandoned every tactical advantage that made Shraxi so dangerous. No flanking maneuvers, no coordination with its remaining packmate. Just pure aggression aimed directly at the human who had disrupted the natural order. Danny didn't try to meet the charge head-on. That would have been suicide against 3 meters of enraged muscle and natural weaponry. Instead, he moved laterally along the path he'd created with the arranged desks, using the classroom furniture to guide the creature's approach. The Shraxi was faster than him by a significant margin. Its species had evolved on a world with 3 times standard gravity, giving it explosive speed and power. But speed without direction was just momentum, and momentum could be redirected. The creature lunged across a desk, its claws extended for a killing strike that would have torn Danny apart. He dropped below the arc of those claws at the last possible instant. Feeling the displaced air from their passage ruffle his hair, the Shraxi's own weight and velocity carried it past him, exactly as he'd calculated as the creature passed overhead. Danny drove upward with the second pencil. The angle was different from his first strike, approaching from below rather than the side, but the principle remained the same. Find the gap, time the strike. Let the target's own movement provide half the force. The graphite tip punched through the 2-centimeter opening, and the Shraxi's nervous system experienced the same catastrophic failure. The creature crashed into the wall behind Danny with enough force to crack the composite panels. It slid to the floor and didn't move again. 2 down, 1 remaining. Danny turned to face the last Shraxi and found it had not moved from its position near the doorway. The pack leader stood absolutely still, all 6 of its eyes focused on the human cadet with an intensity that made the air feel heavy. This one was different from its packmates, older, more experienced, smarter. It had watched both kills with the kind of analytical attention that spoke to high intelligence. Now it was reassessing everything it understood about threat hierarchies and predator-prey relationships. Professor Krell finally found his voice, though it came out shaky. Cadet Price, that shouldn't be possible. The Shraxi are classified as one of the most dangerous predators in known space. You killed 2 of them with pencils. Danny didn't take his eyes off the remaining creature. They're dangerous when they're hunting prey that doesn't know how to fight back, he said quietly. But on Earth, humans learn to hunt animals far bigger and stronger than us. We learn to find vulnerabilities and exploit them. We learn to turn a predator's own instincts against it. Lisa had moved to a position where she could grab more pencils from other desks. She understood what Danny was doing now and was preparing to support him if needed. The pack leader Shraxi tilted its head in a gesture that was almost eerily intelligent. Then it did something that surprised everyone in the room. It began backing toward the doorway, not fleeing in panic like defeated prey, but withdrawing with calculated deliberation, keeping its eyes on Danny the entire time. It's leaving, Thyra whispered in disbelief. It's actually retreating. Professor Krell started to move toward the emergency communication panel. Then we're safe, he said with obvious relief. Commander Barnes can seal this section and… No. Danny interrupted, his voice sharp. Everyone looked at him. It's not retreating because it's afraid, Danny explained, watching the Shraxi's body language with eyes trained to read such things. It's withdrawing because it's reassessing the situation, and it's heading toward the civilian wing. The implications of that hit the room like a physical blow. A wounded predator fleeing toward a populated area full of non-combatants wasn't seeking safety. It was looking for easier prey. Krell checked his tactical display, and his face went pale. The civilian section, he confirmed. Families, children, staff members with no combat training. If it reaches them before security can respond. Danny was already moving toward the doorway. Lisa grabbed his arm. Danny, you can't chase it, she said urgently. You got lucky twice, but that's the pack leader. It's bigger, faster, and now it knows you're dangerous. It won't make the same mistakes its packmates did. Danny gently removed her hand from his arm. I watched enough nature documentaries growing up, he said. Wounded predators are the most dangerous kind. They abandon all caution, all normal behavior. If it reaches those children, he didn't need to finish the sentence. They all knew what would happen. Commander Barnes's voice crackled over the intercom system. All personnel, remain in your secured locations. Security teams are converging on Sector 8. Do not, I repeat, do not engage the hostile xenomorphs. Danny walked through the destroyed barriers into the corridor behind him. Professor Krell called out in protest. Tyra tried to calculate the odds of survival and came up with numbers that made no sense. Vex whispered something in the Karathi language that translated roughly to a prayer for the insane Lisa stood at the classroom entrance, watching Danny disappear down the corridor with a pencil in his hand and determination in his posture. He's going to die, Krell said flatly. Lisa shook her head. No, she replied with absolute certainty. He's going hunting in the corridor. Danny moved quickly, but carefully. The Shraxi had a head start of maybe 30 seconds with its superior speed. That should have been insurmountable, but Danny wasn't trying to catch it through superior speed. He was reading the signs it left behind. Claw marks on the metal flooring where it had pushed off for greater acceleration, subtle sense in the recycled air that his Earth-evolved senses could detect, the faint sound of its passage echoing through the station's infrastructure. Humans hadn't become Earth's dominant species by being the fastest or strongest. They'd done it by being relentless, by never giving up once they started tracking prey, by having the endurance to follow wounded animals for days if necessary until exhaustion made them vulnerable. The Shraxi was faster, but Danny was patient. The creature turned left at an intersection, and Danny knew where it was going even before he reached that junction. The civilian wing had 3 main access points, and the Shraxi was heading for the one with the weakest security barriers. It had learned from watching how easily it had torn through the Academy's defenses. Now it was applying that knowledge. Intelligence made it dangerous, but intelligence also made it predictable. Danny took a shortcut through a maintenance corridor. The cadets weren't supposed to know about Lisa, had shown it to him 3 months ago. When they were exploring the station, he emerged 2 sections ahead of the Shraxi's projected path. The creature came around the corner at full speed and stopped when it saw the human waiting for a long moment. They faced each other in the empty corridor. The apex predator from Shrax Prime evolved over millions of years to be the perfect killing machine, and a human cadet from Earth holding a pencil. The Shraxi's 6 eyes studied Danny with unmistakable intelligence. It recognized him as the threat that had killed 2 members of its pack. It understood that this human was different from the prey it usually hunted, and yet it still outweighed him by 300 kilograms, still possessed claws that could tear through armor plating, still had every physical advantage. The creature's posture shifted from retreat to aggression. It had decided that running was pointless. Better to eliminate the threat and then proceed to easier prey. The pack leader lowered itself into a hunting stance, and Danny recognized what was about to happen. This wouldn't be a blind rage charge like the second Shraxi. This would be calculated, precise, using all the skills and experience that had made this creature the leader of its pack. Commander Barnes' voice came over the intercom again. Security teams are 3 minutes from Sector 8. All personnel maintain lockdown protocols. 3 minutes. Danny gripped his pencil and centered himself on the security feeds throughout the station. Dozens of people watched what was about to happen in the command center. Commander Barnes leaned forward, her tactical training telling her this was impossible in the classroom. Professor Krell, Lisa, Tyra, and Vex held their collective breath. The Shraxi pack leader moved with the kind of precision that came from hundreds of successful hunts. No wasted motion, no telegraphed intentions. Just pure economical violence aimed at eliminating a threat before proceeding to easier prey. Its claws came in from 3 angles simultaneously, using its secondary limbs to create a net of death that should have been inescapable. But Danny wasn't trying to escape the attack. He was using it. Every martial arts instructor he'd ever trained with had taught the same fundamental principle: redirect. Force rather than oppose. A smaller opponent couldn't match strength against strength, but a smaller opponent could use timing and leverage to turn strength against itself. Danny moved into the attack instead of away from it. The motion violated every survival instinct that most species possessed when a predator lunged. You backed away, You created distance. You tried to run. But humans had learned millions of years ago that running from a faster predator was suicide. Better to close distance. To work inside the reach of those deadly limbs. To make the fight about precision. Instead of power, the Shraxi's primary claw strike passed over Danny's shoulder as he dropped and rolled forward. Its secondary limb swept the space where he should have been if he tried to retreat. He came up inside the creature's guard. Pencil raised, targeting the vulnerable gap that he'd hit twice before. But the pack leader was smarter than its companions had watched them die and learned from their mistakes. The Shraxi twisted with impossible flexibility, rotating its armored plates to protect that 2-centimeter opening. Danny's strike glanced off overlapping armor that shifted to intercept. The creature's tail swept around to knock him off balance. He jumped over it, using a nearby wall panel to push off and gain height. For 3 seconds, they exchanged positions with neither landing a decisive blow. Shraxi would strike, and Danny would redirect. Danny would attack, and the creature would defend. It was a stalemate. That couldn't last. The pack leader had superior strength and stamina. Eventually, Danny would tire or make a mistake, and one mistake against those claws would be fatal in the command center. Commander Barnes watched with growing horror. Why isn't he running? One of her officers asked. Security teams are 90 seconds out. If he can just survive, he can't just survive. Barnes interrupted, understanding dawning in her voice. The civilian wing is right behind him. If he retreats, that thing gets past him and reaches the families. She pulled up the civilian section on her tactical display. 32. People sheltering in the designated safe room, 14 of them children under the age of 12. The safe room door would hold against most threats, but they'd all watched the Shraxi tear through supposedly impenetrable barriers against those claws. The civilians had maybe 2 minutes before breach. Danny had to win here, or at minimum, delay the creature. Until security arrived, running wasn't an option back in the classroom. Lisa paced near the doorway. Professor Krell monitored the security feeds with all 4 of his eyes. This is insane, he muttered. One human cadet with a pencil against a fully grown Shraxi pack leader. The statistical probability of survival is... Statistics don't account for human stubbornness, Lisa said quietly. She'd seen Danny do impossible things before, not through superior strength or speed, but through absolute refusal to accept defeat. Thyra was recording everything on her personal datapad. My tactical analysis professors will never believe this, she whispered. The human is fighting at a level that shouldn't be sustainable. He should have exhausted his energy reserves 30 seconds ago. Vex had stopped being terrified and started being fascinated. How is he predicting its movements? The Karathi cadet asked. The Shraxi is faster and more experienced. It should be able to surprise him. Professor Krell studied the footage, and something clicked in his understanding. He's not predicting individual movements. Krell explained slowly. He's reading behavioral patterns. Watch how the Shraxi shifts its weight before attacking, how it breathes before using its tail. The human has cataloged every micro-expression and physiological tell in just these few seconds of combat. He's fighting the species, not the individual. In the corridor, Danny felt his muscles beginning to burn. The adrenaline that had carried him through the first 2 kills was fading. Reality was setting in. He was a third-year cadet in good physical condition, but he was still human, still limited by biology and endurance. The Shraxi, on the other hand, came from a world where the gravity alone would crush most species. It could maintain this level of activity for hours. Danny needed to end this quickly, but the pack leader had learned from watching its companions die. It kept that vulnerable gap protected at all times, never exposed it long enough for Danny to strike, never fell into the predictable movement patterns that had doomed the other 2. This creature was smart enough to change its behavior, to adapt, to recognize that its usual tactics weren't working against this particular opponent. Danny shifted his stance, and the Shraxi immediately responded. They circled each other in the corridor like ancient gladiators, each looking for an opening, each respecting what the other could do. The creature made a feint to the left, and Danny almost fell for it, caught himself at the last second. Recognizing the micro-expression that indicated the real attack was coming from the right, his pencil intercepted the claw strike with a precision that sent sparks from the graphite scraping against natural armor. For a moment, they were locked together face to face, 6 alien eyes staring into 2 human ones. Danny could smell the creature's breath, could feel the heat radiating from its body, could see intelligence in those eyes that recognized him as a worthy opponent in that frozen instant. Danny understood something profound. This wasn't just a mindless killing machine. This was a thinking, feeling being that had evolved to survive on one of the harshest worlds in the galaxy. It wasn't evil. It was doing what millions of years of evolution had programmed it to do: hunt, feed, protect its territory under other circumstances. Danny might have admired the Shraxi's perfection as a predator, but between them and the civilian wing were 32 innocent people. And that changed everything. Danny broke the stalemate by doing something the Shraxi didn't expect. He spoke to it. "I don't want to kill you," he said quietly in standard galactic. The creature's eyes widened slightly, surprised that the prey could speak, surprised that it would use words instead of running or fighting. "But I will if you take one more step toward those people," Danny continued. Shraxi tilted its head, processing, evaluating, making a decision. Then it made the wrong choice. The creature pushed forward, deciding that words were just another prey tactic, a distraction before fleeing. It committed fully to a devastating strike pattern that would end the fight. Danny had been waiting for exactly that. Full commitment meant the pack leader had to expose the vulnerable gap for just a fraction of a second, had to shift its protective plates to generate maximum force, had to move through that predictable arc that hunting behavior required. The pencil left Danny's hand not in a thrust, but in a throw. Precise, calculated trajectory that accounted for the Shraxi's momentum, for the rotation of its armored plates, for the exact moment when the 2-centimeter gap would align with the projectile's path. The graphite tip struck home with all the force of Danny's arm behind it, plus the creature's own forward velocity. Pack leader's eyes went wide, its nervous system shut down mid-strike. A 3 meters of apex predator fell forward. Danny rolled to the side as the massive body crashed to the corridor floor. Where he'd been standing, silence filled the hallway. Danny lay on his back, chest heaving, muscles trembling from exertion and adrenaline crash. His right arm felt like it was on fire from the repeated strikes. His legs shook from the constant movement and dodging, but he was alive, and the Shraxi pack leader was not 30 meters down the corridor. The civilian wing's safe room door remained sealed. The families inside never knew how close death had come. Security teams arrived 40 seconds later to find Danny Price sitting against the corridor wall. 3 dead Shraxi lay between him and the day. Classroom, a broken pencil rested in his lap. Commander Helen Barnes was the first to reach him. She knelt down, her expression showing emotions her tactical training had never prepared her to process. "Cadet Price," she said slowly, "did you just kill 3 fully grown Shraxi with pencils?" Danny looked up at her with exhausted eyes. "Yes, ma'am," he replied. Simply. Barnes stared at him for a long moment. Then she tapped her communicator. "All stations. This is Commander Barnes. The hostile xenomorph situation is resolved. All 3 creatures are neutralized. Civilian casualties, 0. Security casualties, 18. She paused, looking at Danny again. Cadet casualties, 0. Across the station. Personnel began emerging from their safe rooms in the classroom. Lisa, Professor Krell, Tyra, and Vex rushed into the corridor. Lisa reached Danny first and pulled him into a fierce hug. "You absolute idiot," she whispered. "You beautiful, crazy, magnificent idiot." Professor Krell stood over the body of the pack leader. examining it with his scientific mind, even through his shock, the precision required. He muttered, "The timing, the understanding of their biology. I've been studying Shraxi for 30 years and I couldn't have done this." Tyra was already uploading her tactical recording to the Academy's combat analysis database. Every military strategist in the galaxy needs to see this. She said. Vex simply stared at Danny with newfound respect. The medical bay of Meridian 7 Station had seen its share of emergencies over the years, but nothing quite prepared the staff for the aftermath of the Shraxi incident. 18 security personnel had died in the initial attacks. Another 23 had injuries ranging from minor to critical, and then there was Cadet Danny Price. He sat on an examination table while Dr. Kelvin Chun, the station's chief medical officer, ran diagnostic scans with increasing confusion. "Your cortisol levels are elevated, but within acceptable parameters for recent combat," Dr. Chen muttered, studying the readouts. "Muscle strain consistent with intense physical activity. Minor bruising, slight dehydration. But according to your report, you engaged in hand-to-hand combat with 3 Shraxi apex predators. You should be in critical condition or dead." Danny flexed his right arm experimentally and winced. "I didn't really fight them hand-to-hand," he explained. "I fought them with timing and knowledge." "There's a difference." Dr. Chen shook his head and applied a regenerative patch to Danny's shoulder where he pulled a muscle during the final confrontation. The entire station watched the security footage. The doctor said, "What you did shouldn't have been possible. The Shraxi are classified as one of the most dangerous predators in known space." Danny had heard variations of this statement about 17 times in the past 2 hours. "They're dangerous when they're hunting species that evolved on gentler worlds," he replied patiently. "But humans evolved alongside lions, tigers, crocodiles, hippos, and dozens of other predators that wanted to eat us. We learned to survive, not by being stronger, but by being smarter." Outside the medical bay, the station was slowly returning to normal operations. The bodies of the 3 Shraxi had been removed for study. The damaged sections were being repaired, and the Academy administration was dealing with the political aftermath in her office. Commander Helen Barnes faced a holographic communication screen showing Admiral Patricia Stone of the Galactic Defense Fleet. The Admiral's expression was stern. "Commander, I've reviewed your incident report 3 times, Admiral Stone said, "and I still can't quite believe what I'm reading. A third-year human cadet neutralized 3 fully grown Shraxi with no weapons, no backup, and no authorization to engage?" Barnes stood at attention despite the fatigue weighing on her. "That's correct, Admiral. Cadet Price acted entirely on his own initiative. He violated direct orders to remain in the secured classroom. He pursued a hostile xenomorph through multiple station sections, and he eliminated all 3 creatures with minimal collateral damage." The Admiral's stern expression didn't waver. "You understand, this creates a significant problem for Academy protocol. We can't have cadets disobeying orders and engaging in unauthorized combat operations." Regardless of the outcome, Barnes had expected this military discipline required consequences for breaking chain of command, even when those broken orders saved lives. "I understand, Admiral. However, I would like to note for the record that Cadet Price's actions prevented the hostile xenomorphs from reaching the civilian wing, where 32 non-combatants were sheltering. Our security teams, despite their training and equipment, had failed to stop the Shraxi. Without Price's intervention, we would likely be reporting civilian casualties in addition to our security losses." Admiral Stone was quiet for a moment. "I've also been contacted by Professor Krell," she said finally. "He submitted a rather extraordinary report about the incident. He claims that Cadet Price demonstrated advanced understanding of xenobiology, predator behavior analysis, and combat application of academic knowledge. He's recommending Price for immediate advancement to officer candidate training." Barnes allowed herself a small smile. Professor Krell spent the last 3 years dismissing human capabilities in his lectures. Admiral, I suspect this incident has adjusted his perspective. The holographic admiral actually smiled at that. I imagine it has. Very well. Commander, I'll review all reports and recommendations. In the meantime, Cadet Price is confined to station until we determine appropriate action. Barnes out. The communication ended and the commander allowed herself to sink into her chair. Appropriate action for a cadet who saved dozens of lives by breaking every rule in the Academy handbook. That would be an interesting decision in the station's recreation area. Word of Danny's accomplishment had spread through the cadet population like wildfire. Lisa found him there an hour after his medical clearance. Sitting alone at a table and staring at a cup of coffee, she slid into the seat across from him. You're famous, she said. Half the Academy wants to buy you drinks. The other half wants to study how you did it. And everyone wants to know what it feels like to kill 3 apex predators with pencils. Danny didn't look up from his coffee. It feels like I had no choice, he said quietly. Those creatures were heading for the civilian wing. There were children there. Lisa, if I'd followed orders and stayed in the classroom, 32 people would probably be dead. Lisa finished, I know. Everyone knows. You're a hero. Danny shook his head. I'm not a hero. I'm just someone who grew up on Earth and learned that sometimes the smallest tool in the right hands at the right moment can change everything. Thera approached their table carrying her datapad. Cadet Price, I've been analyzing the security footage of your confrontation with the pack leader, she said, her tactical mind clearly fascinated. The probability calculations suggest you should have failed. The Shraxi had superior speed, strength, defensive capabilities, and combat experience. Yet you won. How? Danny finally looked up. Because I wasn't trying to beat it at what it was good at, he explained. I was making it fight on my terms. Humans aren't the strongest or fastest species, but we're really good at turning any situation into a problem. That can be solved with knowledge and timing. Thyra's expression showed she was processing this. Your species evolved to be problem solvers, first and fighters second. Danny nodded. We spent millions of years being the prey. We were food for bigger, stronger predators. But we survived because we learned to think, to plan, to use tools, and to never give up. That's what makes humans dangerous. Not our strength, our stubbornness. Professor. Krell entered the recreation area and spotted Danny immediately. The Vathine instructor approached with an expression that was difficult to read on his alien features. Cadet Price. Krell said formally, May I join you? Danny gestured to an empty chair. The professor sat down and was quiet for a moment before speaking. I owe you an apology. Krell began. For 3 years, I've taught classes that dismissed human contributions to galactic defense. I characterized your species as successful through luck and numbers rather than capability. I was wrong. Danny started to respond, but Krell raised one of his 4 hands. Please, let me finish. What you did today demonstrated something I failed to recognize. Intelligence isn't just about raw processing power or advanced technology. It's about adaptation, pattern recognition, and the application of knowledge under extreme pressure. Your species has those qualities in abundance. The professor pulled up a holographic display showing the Academy's curriculum. I'm redesigning my entire xenobiology course, he explained. Starting next term, there will be extensive sections on human evolutionary adaptations and how they translate to modern combat applications. I'd like you to assist with developing that curriculum, if you're willing. Danny was genuinely surprised. Professor, I'm just a cadet. I'm not qualified to. You killed 3 Shraxi with pencils. Krell interrupted. I'd say you're extremely qualified to teach about practical applications of predator biology. Lisa grinned at Danny's discomfort. Tyra was already taking notes for her tactical analysis report. Vex approached the table hesitantly. Cadet Price. I wanted to thank you, the Karathi student said. In the classroom, when the Shraxi entered, I froze. I'm supposed to be trained for combat situations, but I couldn't move. You saved my life. Danny shook his head. You survived. That's what matters. Fear is natural. The important thing is what you do after the fear. Over the next several hours, more cadets came to speak with Danny. Some wanted to hear the story firsthand. Others wanted tactical breakdowns of each kill. A few simply wanted to express gratitude for saving the civilians. Danny handled it all with the same quiet humility that had characterized his entire academy career. 2 days later, Admiral Stone returned to Meridian 7 in person. The entire academy gathered in the main assembly hall. Danny stood at attention in his dress uniform. Lisa and his fellow cadets behind him. Commander Barnes stood to the side with the academy faculty. Admiral Stone approached the podium. Cadets and staff of the Galactic Defense Academy. She began. We gathered today to address the incident that occurred in Sector 8 3 days ago. 3 hostile xenomorphs breached containment and killed 18 of our security personnel. The creatures were heading toward the civilian wing, with clear intent to cause further casualties. The Admiral paused, her gaze sweeping the assembled personnel. Cadet 3rd Year Danny Price violated direct orders to remain in a secured location. He pursued the hostile xenomorphs through multiple station sections. He engaged them in combat without authorization, backup, or standard weapons. The hall was silent. Everyone knew this could go either way.